channel, it's me, Lene. So I just got done listening to Fields of Verdun by Sabaton. So now I'm going to be listening to the Sabaton history of it. A 303-day long battle. One of the bloodiest battles in history, if not known as the bloodiest battle in history. I have to learn more about it. So without further more, let's check it out. All my announcements I've said in the Sabaton video of Fields of Verdun. So if you want to know anything about that, go check that video out. Also, check out my community page. I do my best to try and upload different announcements as far as what's going on with me and my channel and all that on there, if you want to go check that out as well. So, all right, let's check it out.
The Battle of Verdun was the longest battle of the First World War, lasting over 300 days, and yet the attacking German army was unable to break through that symbol of French national pride.
And our song Fields of Verdun from our upcoming album, The Great War, is about that battle and the French slogan of courage, they shall not pass.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton.
I love his name, Indy Nidell. There's just something like, just comes off of the tongue. Every time he says his name when I'm watching these, I'm just like, I really like his name. And Joachim and Indy.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton. And this is Sabaton History.
Okay, he said Joachim, not Joachim. Probably like dumb Americans. Say it right.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton. And this is Sabaton History.
Now, he's going to tell you a little bit about the song and the album, but I'm going to give you a little Verdun history lesson.
In late 1915, German Army Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn was looking up and down the map of the Western Front. It had been more than a year since the stalemate and trench warfare had begun there. This is during the First World War. The home front was already suffering under the naval blockade, and he feared a war of attrition that the German Empire could only lose. He needed to go on the offensive. To Falkenhayn, the weakest point of the Western Front was the British sector, and attacking at Artois could, he believed, lead to a decisive breakthrough that would collapse the whole Western Front. But he'd learned the hard way that without eliminating or at least tying down the French beforehand, the defense would be too strong. So, to deliver the blow in the north, he would attack at a place further south that would draw in as many French forces as possible. It must be a place the enemy could not afford to lose for strategic or propagandistic purposes, and would thus fight until wiped out. Such a place was Verdun. Verdun was not Falkenhayn's first choice, since it was a heavily fortified area. But it was also a commanding location. By capturing the heights east of the River Meuse and loading them with artillery, the Germans could constantly threaten the city and the local defenses, forcing the French to continuously attack the German defenses. The French would be tied down, and if they lost badly, the British would be forced to intervene. In the best case, they would hastily execute an offensive at the Somme, suffer heavy casualties as well, and open themselves up for a decisive German counterattack. Falkenhayn concluded that if Verdun...
Okay, I get it. Because I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, well, if you're trying to infiltrate the British line right there, then why would you go down and fuck with the French line? But it's to get British troops to come down and help the French fight to weaken that line so that they can go through where it said 2 and 3 right there. If I'm understanding that correctly. Trust me, I see in the comments a lot of the times y'all call me fucking stupid, that I don't understand it and all that. Okay, at least I'm trying, okay?
themselves up for a decisive German counterattack. Falkenhayn concluded that if Verdun was successful, there would be peace before the summer of 1916. The key to the attack was heavy artillery. Total destruction, then attack battalions and pioneers storming the hills in a wedge toward the mighty fortress of Douaumont, taking the remnants of the other fortresses that were surely destroyed by the heavy bombardment. Preparations were made over the winter, massing artillery pieces of all calibers and millions of shells. The attack was planned for February once the weather cleared. On the 21st of February, the bad weather finally cleared, and German aircraft and observation balloons hit the skies. At 7:12 a.m. came the order to attack. The largest concentration of guns in history to this point opened up in a violent concert, described by witnesses as the Symphony of the Devil.
So the largest amount of guns in an area for a battle And then not only that, the bloodiest battle and one of the longest lasting. This is a fucking historic ass fight.
In a violent concert, described by witnesses as the Symphony of the Devil. Even in the Vosges near the Swiss border could be heard the thunder of the German guns. In an intensity never seen before, the barrage destroyed whole forests, blowing trees meters high into the air and raining stones and earth on the poor souls on the ground. Some soldiers were simply obliterated, torn apart by the force of the guns. Others were buried alive deep in their trenches or bunkers. Then the German combat troops emerged from the saps with grenades, wire cutters, and flamethrowers. With the advantage of surprise, they stormed the first French lines. Through ice, rain, and snow, the soldiers fought as rifle shots and grenades burst in their midst. Trench after trench, the Germans gained a foothold, despite fierce resistance from well-camouflaged French machine guns and blockhouses. Thing is, for French Army Chief of Staff Joseph Joffre, Verdun wasn't that important, at least militarily. If the Germans could not be held on the east bank of the Meuse, the French would retreat and build new positions on the western bank. This was what Falkenhayn feared. But Aristide Briand made it perfectly clear that losing Verdun was not acceptable. Not only would the psychological effect be disastrous for the French public, it would undermine trust in the current government. And if Briand lost his job, so would Joffre. So giving up Verdun was out of the question. This is exactly what Falkenhayn had hoped for. However, though the Germans advanced the first weeks, it was not nearly as far as Falkenhayn had calculated, and the French had brought in reserves and Philippe Pétain to lead the men. The most important heights were still far away and under French control, and taking the fortress of Douaumont was the key to those heights. Unlike the big fortresses in Belgium that had quickly fallen to modern heavy artillery at the beginning of the war, the French had used a stronger special concrete for Douaumont that just would not break. And the fortress soon seemed like an island in an ocean of fire and shrapnel. Small platoons of German soldiers that crept towards the fortress in early March found that it was actually mostly empty. And the strongest fortress of Europe was thus taken by a German officer with a pistol and a lot of guts.
Oh, wow.
Fort Douaumont is for many the symbol of the Battle of Verdun. The Germans celebrated its fall, but Douaumont was a trap for the men inside. Every direct artillery hit put out the lights, and the men cowered in darkness for days, living in their own waste, sharing their food with rats and lice, while the stench of the dead and the screams of the wounded haunted the long corridors. But you know, this was actually still better than soldiers outside the fortress walls had to endure in the meat grinder that was Verdun.
Holy shit, how, that sounded bad. What's going on underneath the walls? What's happening out there?
The French just had one supply road out of range of German artillery. Only trucks for military purposes were allowed to use that road, and soon over 3,000 trucks a day were bringing men, ammunition, and supplies up the road. If one broke down, it was simply pushed off the road, which became known as the Voie Sacrée, the Holy Road. The German offensive began to drastically lose speed. The whole area of Verdun had become a maze of trenches and shell holes where death was always near. I mean that literally. This is only an area of 30 square kilometers, and the death toll grew to the hundreds of thousands.
Oh my god, it's just, you have all these people that are hiding, waiting to attack from opposing sides. You can't take one step without putting your life in danger because you don't know where the fuck they are. This is crazy. Oh my god.
The name Verdun became synonymous with the mechanized death of the First World War. But it really bound the French together. Pétain had ordered a new rotation system where no soldier was supposed to stay longer than 10 days in the front lines before being rotated out. This meant most soldiers in the French army had gone through Verdun.
If they were able to make it out.
By April, the lack of progress was turning the whole idea of the Battle of Verdun into a farce. The more reserves Falkenhayn committed to the operation, the fewer he had ready for the real attack against the British.
Yeah, the British, that's not even a thing right now. Oh my, I can't.
So Falkenhayn had to choose:
Wow.
stop the offensive and defend the gains that were made, or keep going with the offensive but with all available forces. Half measures were now unacceptable. He would keep up the offensive. As June arrives, Falkenhayn officially declares bleeding dry as the main aim of the offensive. But bad news now also arrives. Russian General Alexei Brusilov launches his offensive on the Eastern Front. It is a spectacular success, and Germany's ally, Austria-Hungary, might be knocked out of the war. German reinforcements bound for Verdun must instead head east immediately. And more bad news, the French now have air superiority in the west thanks to the new Nieuport 11 planes and air-to-air Lancier rockets. Time seems to be running out for a German victory at Verdun. Falkenhayn launches what he hopes is the final attack towards Fort Vaux and the heights around the village of Fleury. On the 7th of June, Fort Vaux falls. A victory for the Germans for sure. But is this the turning point at Verdun? Not quite, for Fort Souville still stands in the way of victory, and this the Germans cannot take. June marks the limit of their advance at Verdun. On June 23rd, French General Robert Nivelle gives his famous order: "Vous ne les laisserez pas passer, mes camarades," which was later shortened to "Ils ne passeront pas." They will not pass, and indeed, they do not. The French hold out in June, and on July the 1st, the British relief attack begins at the Somme. The pressure there forces German reserves away from Verdun to the north. With the Russians still advancing in the east, there are no options for Falkenhayn available. He must dig in at Verdun, as the three largest battles in history to this point all rage simultaneously. But by August, Pétain has a 7-to-1 advantage in artillery, and the German positions are pounded.
I'm sorry, I'm not talking a lot. This is just a lot. I mean, what a hell of a story. Their plan did not work out the way they thought it was. And for how long this lasted, and could you imagine, just in such a small area, the amount of traps and people there just waiting to kill you, people from opposite sides. It's a shit show. And that everyone had to fight there at one point before being transitioned out into another area of the war.
By August, Pétain has a 7-to-1 advantage in artillery, and the German positions are pounded day and night. And as if things aren't bad enough, Romania joins the Allies. A new front and hundreds of thousands of new enemies emerge overnight for the Germans. Falkenhayn has lost the confidence of his Kaiser and then loses his job. Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff take over running the German army. That, of course, does not mean that the battle is simply over, but it is France's turn to attack. Pétain brings in two 40-centimeter caliber railway guns to fire 900-kilo shells. That's around a ton each on Fort Douaumont, which finally cracks.
That is a big fucking bullet.
8 months after its fall, the French retake the fort in early November, and their counterattack is relentless. What the Germans captured over months of fighting, the French now retake in mere hours. By the end of 1916, the front lines are nearly back where they were in February. For a few kilometers of land, hundreds of thousands of men have died.
And that's what I hear so much about World War I. So many people dying just to gain a little bit of land, and then to have it all be taken back, and you're literally fighting over maybe a mile's worth, probably not even that, of land, just so that you can gain the advantage, just for the opposing side to fight you back, and then them get a little bit of advantage, and then them to fight you back. It was just never ending. It was so fucking stupid. But of course, I wasn't alive at that time. I'm nobody. My opinion doesn't matter. But it just sounds just so chaotic and unwinnable. And the fact that the French came in and they were like, okay, you've had your fun now. All right, go back. Like, they were like, I don't mean it to be lighthearted or nothing. This is an absolute travesty. I'm just saying it's kind of somewhat, I don't want to say funny, but it's interesting how quickly they were able to have the lines go back to the original spot.
Few kilometers of land, hundreds of thousands of men have died. The Battle of Verdun lasted 303 days and nights. Estimates of the total casualties run as high as 1 million men, though it was likely closer to 700,000. But still, it was the longest battle of the First World War. And for many of the war's soldiers, it was the epitome of brutal, mechanized modern war. Many veterans would later remember Verdun by its smell, the mixture of gas, bodies that lay for months unburied, and the mass graves that were churned up by artillery fire.
Oh,
Corpses
God.
that laid for months in the dead zones of no man's land were mummified, the faces frozen in their final expression before death. The soldiers advancing into the forward trenches often had to stomp over the corpses and body parts of their dead comrades. Only the flies and rats thrived at Verdun in 1916. Before Joachim talks about the song, I would like to spoil the moment with a side note. It has been accepted history for a century that Falkenhayn's intention was to bleed France dry at Verdun, but this may not be the case. Falkenhayn claimed that this was his plan from the get-go, and he wrote about it in his 1915 Christmas memorandum to the Kaiser. However, the Kaiser never mentioned such a memorandum, and there's no actual evidence that it ever existed. Falkenhayn may well have made all of this up as an excuse after the fact to explain away his failure. I did a whole episode about the Falkenhayn controversy on the Great War channel. The link is in the description. And now, back to Sabaton.
Wow. Oh
Okay,
my
so new
gosh.
album, bunch of new songs. Now, how was it writing Fields of Verdun specifically?
Oh, to be honest, that was one of the harder ones.
Yeah?
We didn't know where to start, from which angle to cover it. I mean, we were stuck in a mountain of information, but then we just thought, well, let's just start and see where all this info that we have now read takes us. And that actually started to work out, you know.
Now, this album, The Great War, all of the songs have to do with the First World War.
Yes, yes.
But is it a concept album like Tommy, where you have to follow a story? Or...
Oh, yes and no. Let's say it's got a red thread you got to follow or something.
Okay.
All events covered on the album
Yeah.
happened during the Great War,
Yeah.
but they're not chronological ordered.
Okay, so it's a Great War theme without being the Great War concept.
Yeah.
Like if Julio Iglesias, and he does an album, and you know all the songs are about love, so he's got a theme.
Exactly,
He's
yeah.
got a theme on his album.
Well, that's a good name for it, a themed album, because it's not a true concept where we follow it from the beginning to the end.
Because of this particular part of that themed album, you're going to be doing a few things in Verdun this spring and summer, yeah?
Yes, but you weren't supposed to say that because that's a secret. You never heard that shit.
You never heard that. We could cut it out if you really want.
No,
but-
never.
Okay, never.
This is
Okay.
live.
Yes, this is as live. Wow, we're going
man.
live.
Yeah,
Dude, they're so funny with each other.
Hi, Mom.
that's it for today.
But we'll see you next time and every time on Sabaton History.
All right, so I see that there actually is a part 2 to this, so I'm gonna watch that next. And if you are still here watching, let me see.
One
I'm
of
gonna
the early
say a word. If you are still watching at this point, put the word banana down in the comments because that's the last thing that I ate. So put banana down in the comments if you are still watching at this point.
Episodes of Sabaton History was covering the song Fields of Verdun.
And today, we're digging deeper into that story.
This is Verdun. Here, they shall not pass.
What if I tell you that one of the reasons why the French military was beaten in World War II was the Battle of Verdun, fought over 2 decades earlier? See, it was because of the experiences of the Battle of Verdun that the French military had fundamentally changed its strategies. That battle burned itself deeply into the cultural memory of France and of the Great War as a whole. Just the name Verdun invokes reverence among the French, but not of a glorious victory or of a noble defeat, but of a terrible slaughter, in which the French soldiers had prevailed by grim determination. For 10 months, beginning in the early morning hours of February 21st, 1916, when over 1,200 German heavy guns opened up in unison to engulf the whole area in fire and smoke, the bombardments would not stop. For 302 days, German and French soldiers found themselves trapped in a vicious battle for the possession of the hills and fortresses of Verdun. It would become the meat grinder, the triumph of machine over man, and it was the place where Elan went to die. The French word Elan is tricky to translate. It's a philosophical concept that there is a vital force deep within every man that pushes him onward with purpose and conviction. It was also the belief that soldiers,
So, like, motivation?
unshaken in their desire for victory, ready to face pain or even death without hesitation, could ultimately overcome anything the enemy could throw at them. It was a concept that was linked to the past, retroactively attributed to the armies of Napoleon Bonaparte. Putting their trust in France's greatest commander, long lines of foot soldiers marched fearlessly into the musket fire of their adversaries, unfazed by the cannonballs tearing into their ranks. As long as they kept their faith, they would be victorious over the tools of the enemy. That was indeed a widespread belief in the French officer corps as the Great War began. That fixation on the old, glorious Napoleonic era was not just embodied in the brightly colored, armored and plumed cuirassiers that rode out to battle in August 1914. Most of the French battlefield doctrines revolved around the rapid deployment of the French 75, an excellent rapid-firing light artillery piece that was expected to dominate the battlefield. Its batteries would be close to the
Look at that whole just case of bullets.
front, supporting the rapid advance of the French infantry, and together they would achieve a quick, decisive victory. The idea of sitting back and shooting at the enemy from afar was never really accepted, as everything was centered on an offensive push. Heavy artillery was considered useful only in siege warfare against fortresses. French pre-war high command, however, judged fortresses to be a thing of the past and obsolete in the face of modern high-explosive shells. The reality of Great War trench warfare proved them all dramatically wrong, as the German heavy guns obliterated the French field positions with unparalleled force in the early stages of Verdun. The French were still trying to catch up with production. It was the durability of the fortresses and the unrelenting defensive fire of the field guns and the infantry that stemmed the tide against the German attackers.
Like I said before, I'm sorry I'm not talking a lot. I'm just trying to really take all this in, just the amount of destruction behind this decision.
Despite the German heavy artillery dominating the area through its sheer firepower, the French kept the enemy from breaking through. Consequently, Verdun proved not to be the war-deciding battle the Germans had hoped for. It would be a battle of attrition instead. Both the German and the French commanders soon spoke about how they would bleed the enemy dry, or how one side would eventually outkill the other. It would be only a matter of time. 100 years earlier, Napoleon would have had to stand on a nearby hill to overlook the battle in person, as well-timed orders decided victory or defeat. Now there was enough time for generals far away to lean over their large maps with markers in hand and make plans for weeks ahead of time. The war of attrition was fought systematically and methodically, as
The war of attrition. Attrition. I feel so stupid. I don't know what that means.
mathematicians calculated the most effective killing zones of the heavy guns. Verdun made it clear that the war was fought not only by its soldiers, but by its scientists and its factories as well. The side that gave their guns a slightly better range, made their explosives slightly more devastating, or supplied the larger calibers quicker than the other, controlled the flow of battle. In 1914, they had expected that the whole French arsenal needed 13,600 shells a day to keep the
Oh, a day.
75
Well. Fuck, that's so much. Oh my god.
operational. By 1916, the number had risen to 77,000. And by then, they were also building and supplying heavy guns and howitzers. In the 10 months of the Battle of Verdun, over 60 million shells would rain down over the battlefields. That's like 6 tons for every meter of the front. Even if Napoleon could have looked over Verdun, what was there for him to see? Crater after crater in a barren waste.
That's what I was thinking. This place is destroyed. It's flatland. It's flatland with craters, and that's it. Whatever was there ceases to exist.
Land, hidden by smoke and gas so thick that it sometimes blotted out the sun. If he was lucky, he would have seen men, but not those armies of old marching in rows in their bright red and blue uniforms, but small groups of nervous men covered in dirt and mud who pressed themselves to the ground. And it didn't matter what Napoleon would have said to them, he could not have made himself heard anyway. The constant noise of detonating explosives, of rumbling mortars, Grinding gears, barking machine guns, and whistling mines drowned out every spoken word.
I can kind of understand, well, I can't understand because I wasn't there, but whenever they said Symphony of the Devil, that kind of noise, plus the cries and the death and the... I don't think the human mind can understand that unless we're in that situation. We could try to imagine it the best that we could, but unless you're there, I don't think that the brain can understand that. And honestly, even while you're there, I don't know if the brain can understand it.
It was an inhuman concert of guns that played songs of destruction. The Germans called it Trommelfeuer because it sounded like smashing the hide of drums for hours and hours on end without stopping. In quiet moments, the veterans were able to distinguish the size of the incoming shells by the sounds that they made in the air. A small one sounded different from a large caliber shell, and they soon knew when and where they had to make the split-second decision to dive for cover.
Wow.
The fumes and odors
Their ears became adjusted to the bullets. That's amazing.
of spent gunpowder, of chemicals like ammonia and chlorine, of charred wood and decaying corpses soon made their way into the tunnels and dugouts where the soldiers spent their days. Here they huddled together, fearing asphyxiation or entombment. As incoming projectiles trembled the earth above them, whole villages had simply disappeared, blasted off the earth, and woods were reduced to skeletal remains. The same fate awaited the men unlucky enough to be caught out in the open. It was this inhumanity, this nightmarish hell, that gave Verdun such a lasting effect on the cultural history of the Great War. It was the intensity of the conflict, the force of mechanical warfare pitted against fragile humanity. For decades, the veterans of Verdun declared that millions must have died here, that nothing could compare to the destruction they endured. It
God, look at that one guy right there compared to just that whole side of that hill.
was the capital of death, the slaughterhouse, the bone mill. In reality, in the 10 months of battle, the French army suffered approximately 375,000 casualties. In contrast to that, from just August to November 1914, the War of Maneuver had cost the French 850,000 casualties. In a weird paradox, the War of Machines had actually saved lives. So, more and more men were pulled from the infantry and instead assigned to the artillery regiments or the aviation corps. In June 1916, the French reduced their infantry battalions from 4 to 3 companies, effectively reducing their size from 1,000 to 750 men each. More firepower was emphasized, not numbers, and the now smaller infantry detachments were simply upgraded with the blessings of the machine god. More mortars, more grenade launchers, more machine guns, more automatic rifles. No one mentioned Elan anymore. Even the smallest infantry attacks were not to be undertaken without adequate artillery support. Verdun was really the moment where the French military reversed their thinking. Speed was now of secondary importance, as men could not outrun the thunder of guns. Instead, the soldiers were suddenly encouraged to take their time, to remain in smaller but cohesive groups, and only to move under the cover of heavy artillery. Napoleon's offensives were now finally a thing of the past. Of course, this change took time to become overall dogma, and the disaster of the French Nivelle offensive a year later showed that lives were still easily spent on the battlefield. But the overall idea that machines and artillery were to ultimately prevent casualties while inflicting more on the enemy began to manifest itself. The shadow of the Great War was long, and the lessons of Verdun had changed French military thinking from the ground up. Waterloo had once lasted 10 hours, Verdun 10 months. Like Verdun, the next war was expected to be a long one as well, ending by a victory through attrition. So defenses were built. The Maginot Line was actually an entire defense system running from the Channel to the Mediterranean and beyond, named after André Maginot, who had been severely wounded in the War of Movement in November 1914 near Verdun. It was to protect France from such a fate once more. On the more open ground of the littoral and northern France, it had fewer constructions, because fighting a war of motion on that ground would be suicidal for the attackers. Further east along the borders with Germany and Italy, it featured a mutually supporting line of forts, casemates, and bunkers designed with Verdun in mind. with static mechanical war in mind. But it gave them a false sense of security. For the Germans embraced the ideas of speed and quick battlefield maneuvers once again. No one could have foreseen the future, of course, but the Verdun mindset, on which many of the French decisions of World War II were based, would have serious consequences. Per, why are we digging deeper into Fields of Verdun?
There's obviously a lot more to tell.
Sure.
First of all, it's very, very massive battle. How many episodes did you cover it in before?
Well, it lasted, what, 301 days? At the time, it was the longest continuous battle, as far as I know it still is, longest battle in history that was not a siege, because it was a continuous battle.
So you covered it in a lot of
Every
episodes.
single week after week, from February, I was going to say 1916, but February 2016 until December 2016, and then the aftermath you have to talk about too. You know?
That's true.
So,
So and there is another story to it. I mean, when we did the first episode, we had no emotions. It was brand new for us.
Yeah.
We didn't know much about the song at all. It was actually so new that we barely had felt to play it.
Right.
And but this song, we had an idea that, okay, it will be one of the singles of the album, and it should be one of the leading songs, and the battle is one of the leading stories of the whole album.
Sure.
So we were like, let's do something more.
Sorry, y'all, my cat will not leave me alone. She gets jealous when I'm at the computer for too long.
And that's when we started to talk, you know.
Yeah.
Cayenne's the good cat. She's right here. But Pepper, she's the needy one.
About we should do something on location, we should go together, and we wanted to present the new album to media in a place where mattered to the album. So we actually went together down to Verdun in France, and we had some great times there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We were together with about 80 different journalists from around the world presenting the new album, and we were also shooting some on location, which was our first time when we were like in a different location.
I wonder what it looks like now, if they've rebuilt, if they've left it as a memorial. I wonder what it looks like. I'm probably going to look that up after this if it doesn't show it.
And then on the Bavarian studio.
Right. Yeah, no, that was cool. That was a great trip. And then you really did get to, I'd been to Verdun before with the Great War, but you guys did get to, like when you go to like Fleury and when you walk around like the blasted landscape,
It's something unbelievable that you told us before what we're gonna feel when we get there, and we felt it for sure.
If you really want to remember it properly, I mean, it'll change your perspective when you see, I mean, we see some pictures of like the landscape. It's like the moon.
Oh, wow. It's just so uneven. The trees are coming back. Like, it just shows how recent this was for how small the trees are. Unless they've replanted them recently, but God, look at that ground. There's not a flat spot anywhere. I wonder if they got all the bodies out or if they just kind of melted into the dirt, you know?
Moon, but covered with grass, basically. But that part of France, that's the least populated part of France, that northeast part. And so it's desolate, but it's also beautiful. Verdun, the town, is a beautiful town.
Yeah, it is.
It's a fantastic place to really understand your history and our history, even if you're not French, American, or German, or British, but did very much shape the world in which we live.
Perhaps, or most likely, one day, Sabaton's gonna return to Verdun. And
I'd love to go back with you, because
do something there. We already had the idea. We tried to make a concert in Verdun when we had all the journalists there. We tried to make it, but it was basically it's a little bit tricky place to do a concert in. And it's not the normal city that you would normally play in the area, but we really wanted to make it there. And it was a little bit tricky to explain before announcing what the new album is going to be like. To talk to the agents, like, we want to do a concert in Verdun. And they're like, why would you want to play in Verdun when you can play in another big city?
How could they?
Well, why not? That's what the song's about. That's what Sabaton's about. They're about, you know, war-esque. So I think that'd be fucking awesome. That would make sense to me.
Not guess what is going.
If it was respectful, though, to the land, to the families, to, you know, if it was respectful.
We really need your support. So become a patron, subscribe.
Go and support Sabaton. Oh my gosh, what a fucking story. Oh, so much death, so much destruction. That was a lot. Like I said, once again, I'm so sorry I didn't talk a lot. that was just a lot to take in. Now I understand whenever I said in the beginning, why were the people underneath saying it wasn't as bad as being on top? Fuck. There was no area that you could go that was safe in that place. Your life was on the line anywhere that you went. It's just... I can't even really put words to it. The fear and the unpredictability of it, and just the fucking decision in the beginning to try and do all this to lure down some British troops so that they could infiltrate that line up at the top where the British were. They had no idea what they were getting into trying to fuck with that spot. I'm sorry. I probably sound so stupid, y'all. Like I said before, at least I'm trying. I can't stand it whenever people just assume that they know everything about this type of stuff without going in and actually listening to it and trying to teach themselves things. I, of course, wouldn't go out there and talk about it as if I knew everything, because of course I don't. This is just something that I like to do. I like to learn about the history of the world, and Sabaton makes it fun. So, alright y'all, 86% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. I also have the option for a membership. You get priority reply to comments, loyalty badges, stuff like that. I also have the option for a super thanks if you feel motivated to do so. Maybe for a late Christmas present. Anything is appreciated. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back and listening to me. And with that,